Hello, my name is Annika Bern, and I'm here to talk you through some of the theoretical underpinnings of the movement-based design methods that we are discussing in this course. So, enclosed to this module in the course, you have a report called Theoretical Underpinnings of Embodied Design Theory. And this report was produced in the MeCaMInD project as an internal report. But while we were working with the report, we realized that understanding a bit of the theories underlying the methods is actually important to be able to use the methods and also understand a little bit of why they matter. So the first thing I want to say is that theory is actually practically useful. It gives us words. Sometimes these are words for things we already know, but that are difficult to talk about because we do them as part of our practice, and they are tacit knowledge in what we do. So being able to just talk about them is one of the things that theory can give us. Theory can also help us find paths that we wouldn't think of otherwise. It can help us think outside the box by providing new options. It can also be more precise. It can help us when we are, for example, using a method and seeing what happens. It can help us understand what's going on. It can classify phenomena for us. And finally, sometimes theory can also help us in selecting, doing exact choices. And this can be if we have several ways of doing a design, that we select one of them, but can also be just selecting the most appropriate methods for doing the design work. So theory has a use in practice, but how? How can we make that happen? When we discuss this, we need to start with understanding that we don't mean one single thing when we say theory and when we talk about theory. And why is that? So movement-based design is a practice. It's very, very practical. We learn it not through reading books or papers, but we learn it through engaging in practice with design methods, with the design process, problems we're trying to solve. And we do this over and over again, building up our skills. So theory can help, but depending on what we are using it for, and in particular in what phase of a design process we're using the theory, it will do very different things for us. So the way we approach theory in these kinds of practice, very practical design exercises, is that it's sort of eclectic. We don't really care what it comes from as long as the net result is useful. And we're pulling our theories from a very wide variety of scientific fields. And they even sometimes are different in their philosophy, in what we in research call epistemology, what we consider a valid proof for something being a theory or not. This doesn't matter, because as long as it says something that's useful for us, we still use it. And this also means that the way we tend to approach theory in movement-based design is rather shallow. We work not so much with the whole underpinning theories and more with key concepts from the theories. These concepts that sort of summarize some of the main takeaways from the theories, and that's used to communicate those concepts, those ideas. So in the report, we work with key concepts that are of slightly different types. So first of all, we have sensitizing concepts. And these concepts are rather abstract. They are the ones that are basically just words. They support communication between people. They give us a bit of analytical lens, a particular perspective of a phenomenon. And one interesting thing with sensitizing concepts is that they even support communication with people that have fairly different backgrounds and different skills. And sometimes we might not mean exactly the same thing when we're using the same word, as long as we understand enough, our understanding is enough shared, we can still use them for communication. Inspirational concepts are very similar, but they also provide some inspiration for the actual design. Inspirational concepts are inspirational often precisely because they bring out and highlight some options we might not think about otherwise. Analytical concepts are yet more concrete. They are useful when you have a phenomenon that you have observed. You might, for example, have a video that you have recorded of a couple of people doing something interesting, and then you can say things like, oh, right now they are doing X, and in a little while, oh, now they're doing Y. If you can do those kinds of analysis, then you're working with analytical concepts. Some of them also provide scales, so you could say, oh, right now they're doing very little of X, and now they're doing it a lot. But what they don't do is they don't help you so much in understanding how you achieve a particular effect. That is done in guiding concepts. Guiding concepts are more directed towards the design process as such. They can offer options. You could solve this problem by doing X or Y or Z. They can provide you with methods for achieving a particular effect. And sometimes they give very precise guidelines. If you want to achieve effect X, then consider using Y, doing Y. So what you see here is that you have a scale from rather abstract concepts towards very precise concepts. One thing with these concepts is that they sort of fit in different phases of a design process. So as most designers are aware of, design processes tend to be cyclic. They are iterative. They go through multiple phases where you might start with just understanding a problem, then coming up with a set of solutions, ideation. Then you go over to realizing these prototypes, other kinds of ways of realizing your ideas. And once you have them done, then you can do an evaluation. You can check if you achieved the effects you wanted to. So sensitizing concepts are mostly useful in the early phases, in the sensitizing phase. Inspiring concepts help in ideation primarily. Guiding concepts can take you from ideation to prototypes, and analytical concepts are very useful in the evaluative phase. But they aren't restricted to these phases. So analytical concepts can be very useful also in the early phases. And guiding concepts can be something that you use also for sensitizing and so on. But they sort of have a particular role in the design process. Another way of looking at them is that some of them are much more abstract than others. So the sensitizing concept and the inspiring concepts are both of a rather abstract type. They say something that's quite generic, but they don't give a lot of precise guidance. Analytical concepts and guiding concepts, on the other hand, are much more concrete, but they are also more narrow in scope. They don't always work. If you have a particular research problem, they could help a lot when they are relevant, and in other settings, they might not be relevant at all. Furthermore, some of them are more geared towards design and others are more geared towards analysis. So the ones that are mostly used for design are guiding concepts and inspiring concepts, whereas sensitizing concepts and analytical concepts are more used in observation and analysis. Finally, I want to say that in a way, all concepts can be used as sensitizing concepts, and then they become more and more precise. So guiding concepts can be used also as analytical or inspirational concepts. But the more precise they get, the more narrow they also are in scope. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk you through 4 examples of theories that are discussed in the report, but are different in the sense that some of them are more, they generate sensitizing concepts only, whereas others are much more precise and give guiding concepts as well. So we're going to talk first about a theory that primarily provides sensitizing concepts. The theory I've chosen here, there are many more in the report, so this is just one example, is activity design. Activity design is still fairly precise because it's geared towards a particular form of design activity where you're trying to design what people do. Some of the sensitizing concepts that come out of this way of looking at design are concepts such as embodied core mechanics. Embodied core mechanics are things that people do that is sort of the core goal of a particular activity. So, for example, if you're designing a support system for people who are running, or if you're designing an activity that will encourage people to run, then the core mechanics you're designing for is running. And by identifying the embodied core mechanics, you can investigate different ways of changing, inspiring, encouraging, limiting this particular way of moving. Another sensitizing concept from activity design is the idea of second-order design. So second-order design means that designers don't actually design what people do. They design something that supports people's doing. And the reason for that is simple. It is the participants that move. It's the participants that actually do the activity. So all you can design are things to support that. And what are those things? Well, they could be pieces of technology or objects that they use, but they could also be the instructions you give them, or the room they are located in and how that space is organized. So second-order design refers to the fact that you have a host of design options and materials available. And through those, you can design a setting that encourages and restricts or supports a particular activity. Going further, I want to give an example of a theory that mainly provides inspirational concepts, and the one I've chosen here is a theory of value stances. So whenever we do design projects, we do design for particular values, but we very, very seldom talk about these values, and we might not even always be aware of what values we're designing for. So bringing the values up, discussing them explicitly, gives us the opportunity to also change them. Or prioritize between them, or consider values that we didn't consider originally. In the report, we are discussing in particular common value stances in sports, such as fellowship or empathy and so on. So if you are doing a design project that's targeting sports in particular, then these values are potential values that you could be designing for, and you might be designing for completely without realizing that you're working with that particular value. So value stances help us, it might inspire us to do things differently, but they don't give a lot of guidance. It's very hard to say that, oh, we actually managed to achieve fellowship, for example. Fellowship is hard to measure. Going further from here, let's take a theory that provides analytical concepts, and the one I have selected is proxemics. So proxemics is a theory that's built on a lot of empirical study, and it looks at the ways that people use space to mediate social interaction. In this theory complex, we have a host of ways that we can measure and analyze the way we orient ourselves in space. For example, an important concept is the concept of personal space. The personal space is the space around us, the physical space around us, that we want to keep for ourselves. We get uncomfortable if people come into our personal space. And the thing with personal space is that this is culturally and also to some extent situationally dependent. So this means that you can measure in a particular situation what is the personal space in this situation, but you can also use it to say that if you're designing an activity for or a space for Swedes, you might consider a different size of the personal space than if you were designing, for example, for Italians. Another thing that has been done a lot is that in proxemics, they have been looking at how people orient themselves in space, depending on what is the social activity going on. So one example of this is that you can be oriented sociofugally or sociopathically. And if you are looking at sociofugal orientations, that's what we typically do when we are collaborating in a group. So we orient each other towards each other. We create some kind of space between us, which we turn into. We take eye contact and so on. Sociopathal orientations are more common if you have a public space where you don't want to collaborate. So, for example, in the subway, people will try to turn a little bit away from each other. They will turn their backs to each other. They will not look each other in the eyes. And with these kinds of analytical concepts, you can actually see a bit what is the activity going on by just looking at how people orient themselves in the room. I want to talk a little bit about the photo here because it's a photo from a study we did some years ago with a telepresence robot. A telepresence robot is a moving robot with a video screen, basically, that somebody can be in a different space somewhere and participate on distance in a physical social activity. So in this case, we have a telepresence robot controlled by a person in another room, and what he's trying to do is participate in a theater class. And in this particular photo, we see that the robot has managed to join a circle of people sitting on the floor, being part of this group activity. This was actually hard. The person controlling the robot had to work for a while to figure out how they could make space for themselves, how they could join the circle, how they would have to move in the room, and the group had to get used to having the robot there. So by using proxemics, we could say something about when the robot was considered another agent person in the room and when it was considered like mostly a piece of furniture, moving furniture. This shows how a little bit of how you can use a more analytical theory. Finally, I want to talk you through a design theory that gives even more precise guidance also for the designs themselves. The theory I picked for this purpose is soma design. Summa design is an approach to design of computational artifacts, interactive things, basically, where what you want to do is to help people understand their own body and increase the sensory appreciation of their own bodies. An interesting thing with this theory is that the goals include obviously designing for the end users, but in the goals is also ways of increasing the awareness and the sensory appreciation of the designers themselves. The reason for this is that the somatic experience is very much felt inside. It's very hard to observe somebody else's somatic experience. So this means that designers have to be good at understanding their own somatic experiences to be able to design those of others. Soma design has concepts that give fairly precise design goals, and those concepts also come with some guidelines on how you could achieve those goals. So one such design goal is subtle guidance. This means that the feedback that somatic computational artifact should be providing shouldn't be too in the face. It should be subtle, it should be a little bit in the background, and it should be smooth so that it gives room to explore, for the user to explore different sensations, both from their own bodies, but also from the technology. Another concept in this design goal set is the concept of intimate correspondence. Intimate correspondence says something about how the feedback from the computational artifact has to be very closely related to what you're feeling in the body, what you're feeling and doing in the body, so that it almost feels like an extension of yourself. Soma design can provide a lot of guidance, but it is also a theory that isn't always applicable. Some of the design projects we do in movement-based design, this is very relevant. In other settings, it doesn't make sense at all. But when it makes sense, it can give a lot of guidance. To conclude this short presentation, I want to say a couple of words about how you could approach reading the report. First of all, be aware that not everything you find in the report is actually relevant. Some of the theories might strike a chord with you, others might come across as completely meaningless in your context. That's fine. That's how theories should work in a practice-based design process. Pick and choose. Take the things that you find relevant. Secondly, don't hope too much. There is no golden bullet. There is no theory that will solve your particular design problem. It's still your problem, and you will have to approach it through iterative design, just as any other designer will do. Finally, see the report as an entry point. It consists of fairly brief summaries of sometimes very, very complex theories. If some of these theories strike a chord with you, I suggest that you also go to the sources. There is a fairly extensive reference list in the report, and there is many, many more articles and books out there on almost everything that's even mentioned in this report. So with that, I wish you good luck in reading and good luck in your own design projects.